we will listen from our guest speakers talk about the impact of our changing climate and rising sea. After their 45-minute conversation, there will be time for a Q&A. If you wish to participate, please raise your hand and I'll hand the mic to you. By the end of the program, Benjamin will be signing books. Please remember to put your phones in silence, and if you would like to purchase An Unflinching Look, they are for sale in the back of the room. And with that being said, Benjamin and Alison, the mic is all yours.
Am I on? Now I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Magda. Thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is my second visit to Asheville, and I'm having a very good time. And I love your museum. It's a wonderful museum. I came early on purpose so I could spend some time here. We have 45 minutes to address what has been literally a life's work for this artist. And we're not quite sure how we're going to do it. We're mostly going to talk. It's a conversation. But, oh, and happy Hanukkah. It's happening right now. I thought it would be useful to start with just an introduction to this project. Some of you may know something about it, many of you may not. And so I wanted to ask Benjamin to just start by showing us some pictures and telling us how this project began and how it ended.
I'm not sure it's ended.
Okay, that's another question I have for you.
A very good question. Well, first let me situate us. The Chaswiska National Wildlife Refuge is on the Gulf Coast of Florida. That's the west coast, about 70 miles north of Tampa. And it is a vast area. It's the part of the Gulf Coast where, and this goes on up all the way up to below Tallahassee. There are no barrier islands, there are no beaches. It's just the Gulf of Mexico and estuaries. A lot of them in the area where the Chaswiska is are spring-fed, and that's where this takes place. This taking place is a result of several factors, but primarily we have fossil fuels, which we've been burning for 100 some odd years, and those are creating global warming, and the global warming melts glaciers, and that causes the seas to rise. And if you have a coastline that is as flat as the Big Bend coast is, then you're going to have saltwater pushing against the spring-fed creeks which are coming out. So there's tidal action constantly. There's also hurricanes like Hurricane Idalia, which came in at Cedar Key up the coast a little bit further this fall. But there are other factors, and I'm going to just read a little bit from one of my authors who is better than I am at talking about these factors. The source of spring discharge for rivers like the Chaswiska is groundwater in the aquifer, which is now only partially replenished by rainfall soaking into the ground. Millions of gallons of fresh spring water are pumped from the ancient underground limestone and sprayed on fields and lawns, run through showers and flushed down toilets, and used to generate electricity. Moreover, our politicians, speaking of Florida politicians, permit private corporations to siphon millions more gallons into plastic bottles for sale around the country. The result? Water flow emerging from the Chaswiska spring system has declined by more than half, from 138 cubic feet per second before 1980 to less than 61 in 2017. Secondly, Water that still bubbles out of the springs is polluted by nitrate, a plant growth nutrient that originates mostly from fertilizers and animal and human waste deposited on the land surface or via septic tanks. Nitrate pollution fuels the growth of algae blooms, which are smothering springs and the rivers they feed and putting human health at risk. In the Chaswitzka, nitrate levels have doubled since 1980. Finally, the fresh water coming out of many springs is showing signs of a growing saltiness. For the Chaswitzka, the salinity is now 44 times greater than it was in 1980. Historically, fresh water flowed to the coast through spring creeks and rivers, holding in check the landward encroachment of the salty Gulf waters. This balance protected upstream waters and the underground aquifer from saltwater intrusion for thousands of years. But in the last 40 years, as enormous quantities of fresh water have been pumped from the springs and aquifers, saltwater has migrated landward, killing freshwater ecosystems and rendering our drinking water unusable. The problem has been compounded by rising sea levels in the Gulf. Coastal springs like the Chaswitzka are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise and increasing storm surges from the Gulf. So that's what I've photographed. It's not just one thing or the other. It's a lot of factors, and one of the others is economic, and that this sort of thing occurred where no one would see it. This is very remote, and very few people are keeping track of it.
And so the project began 40 years ago. When did you first photograph in the Chaswitzka?
My first trip up there was in 1977, and I went there with a friend fishing, and my brother joined us. And that is, oh my God, a segue?
Yeah.
No, I'm aiming over here. Do I have to? At home, I slap my monitor on the left side, and that usually works.
Do you want to just work the
Yeah.
computer for us? Thanks. Next picture, please.
1977. So the photographs in the book span 45 years.
And in 1977, you were a recent college graduate.
Yes.
You thought of yourself as a photographer, and you were moved to photograph here because you were there, because
really only, that was the first time I went, and I didn't go there again until 1985.
And did you notice the change in the landscape then?
It hadn't started.
Okay.
This has been going, the changes started in toward the beginning of the century.
Okay.
And very subtle, and then became very pronounced.
And at what point did you realize that you had a then and now project happening?
I didn't think of it that way. So I've been photographing there often seriously, and sometimes not. I had my bachelor party there. There were no photographs taken there.
Pity, they'd probably really like them.
There were mermaids that came up the springs. Your last question was?
So distracted by the thought of mermaids. What you're doing in this book is presenting the change that has happened, as you say, in a place where no one could see it.
Yes.
But I'm very interested in the way the book was kind of conceptualized. And at a certain point in this project, you had this idea that what the project would be a comparison of what had been and what is. And I'm curious about at what point in your trajectory did that idea happen?
I had been photographing there kind of in earnest since, let's say, 2004. I started a project that very specifically was about what I thought might have places that I felt were vulnerable to rising seas, storms, worsening storms, and overdevelopment. This was my favorite place to photograph because it looked like this, and I had never seen anything like this, and I was kind of fascinated with this. This is 35 millimeter, and
Right.
this is handheld and probably shot in 1986.
Okay.
And as I became more focused on this as a project, I would go back, I would use infrared film, which is what this is, and use a real camera, and in this case, a tripod.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what it looked like, and I became very fond of it, and I continued to add to it. The saltwater intrusion didn't begin until around 2010. It wasn't noticeable in 2010. When I looked back at photographs taken in 2010, I could see what I wasn't aware of at the time. And the creeks had eelgrass, which was wonderful. And when you put the tripod down in the creek, you felt these long grass-like things brushing against your leg, and I had to remember that these were not snakes or alligators.
And were you pretty much working alone?
I would be out all day long
Mm-hmm.
and get back to the cabin at the end of the day. And this is what I decided to do as part of the project when in 2014 I went up there and discovered that someplace like that photograph was made in 1986, started to look like this. It's the same spot exactly. And I was horrified, and a couple years down the road I started making pairs. But what I did was get in touch with scientists, and this is something that I wasn't used to doing, but I was very curious because in college, way back in the 70s, we were taught about sea level rise and melting glaciers and global warming, and in 1972 that seemed like it would happen not just in the next century but long after we were
Well,
gone.
and it happened visually in a place that you care about very much.
Yes.
And I mean, one of the things that I think makes this book very special, and it's hard for me to separate the photo project of the last 40 years from the book itself, which manifests it. But one of the things that's really special about this book, I look at a lot of photo books, and this is a science book and an art book. And I think that was very bold on the part of the University of Georgia Press. And I'm going to be watching with great curiosity to see whether it works, whether this book is both of interest to people who appreciate fine art photography and of people who are looking for a document of sea level rise, who are interested in the visual manifestations of the science.
And it was the first thing I did in 2014 when I came back with the film of this devastation, was to call universities in the Tampa Bay area, and I found your co-writer, Matt McCarthy, who was a native Floridian, young man finishing his graduate program at the University of South Florida in studying remote sensing from satellite imagery and airplane imagery. And he said to me when I finally got a lot of emails sending people pictures, and he said, "Oh, you have photographs of this?"
Yeah.
I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'd love to use them." And I said, "Well, I'd love to know what
I'd love
you're
to
writing."
use you.
Yeah, I tried to say it delicately and ask him to answer my question so that I understood this, because I learned this in 1972, but here it is in 2014, and I'm saying to myself, this is happening? Is this the future is now? And he said, yeah.
But you always envisioned it as a climate change book as well as a fine art book.
Well, we do this. We say, okay, I am an artist. I have a tripod and a camera, and this is what I do, but if it's going to be published by University Press, it has to have this and this and this. And I was just making the photographs. I didn't really think about where this was going.
Okay.
I just kept photographing it and photographing it. I made a commitment to do this, especially once I learned the science. I kept going up there. Someone recently said, "How many trips have you made to the swamp?" And I said, "Let me go check." And I looked at contact sheets, and something like 25 trips between 2014 and this
So
past-
several trips a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had an exhibit at my gallery in Tampa, and I didn't have enough work, so I went there like 4 or 5 times one year. I know.
Let's look at a few more pictures as we move through this part. And I think another thing that's useful to emphasize is that now when you started this project, though you didn't know it was a project at the time, but when you started this, you were shooting film because there was no alternative.
Correct, there was no
And
digital.
You're still shooting film. And as we look at these pictures, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about why shoot film? It's so difficult.
Because I know it and I like it.
Okay.
And I've shot jobs. I moved here from New York City, and in order to live in New York City, you have to, if you're a fine art landscape photographer, you have to do jobs.
Sure.
Because what I do 8 years and nobody gave me anything for any of this. So I learned to shoot digitally and shot jobs, but I didn't think at all about using digital.
So it was a personal artistic choice. And aside from the fact that you know film and like film, are there particular qualities of these photographs that you felt you couldn't get shooting digitally?
I just don't like. I don't have.
Okay.
I don't have a sense. Well, there's no there with film.
Interesting.
And also, I have, when it came time to think in terms of the entire project, as I did when I got the deal to do the book, I realized in order to make it the way I wanted, I needed the old photographs. And the old photographs were on film.
So you wanted the consistency
So
also.
I went and got the 35 millimeter film camera in, recently, and got it checked and lubed and made sure it was still working, and went out and shot with the same tool to place it.
But generally you're not working in 35.
Correct. I had used a 35
Sure,
millimeter camera in a really long time. But to answer your question more specifically, I like black and white. And one can shoot digitally and then convert it to black and white, but if I have the darkroom and I have the film in the refrigerator and the cameras and the photo paper and the rest of it, then those are my tools.
And certainly the American landscape tradition is a black and white tradition. That may yet change, but when we think of the grand old men of landscape photography, we are thinking of black and white.
Yes, and white men.
Well, that
That's
too.
another.
That too.
Yeah. But let's roll on. So this is the cabin I stay in when I visit. That's 1987, and this is 2021.
Is that the canoe that you shoot from?
Yeah, well, that's a metal one. There's a, yeah, I think I did include that. There's also a fiberglass one. But the aluminum.
But you're shooting from a boat
In a lot of cases.
with a big camera.
With a medium format film camera. A lot of the photographs are done with a tripod and cable release and all that. But I am also shooting from a canoe. This is another diptych, 2006, 2022. This is easy to remember, 2011, 2021, same spot. And 2004.
Now, are the palm trees surviving, or are they just the last ones to go?
The palm tree, such a good question. I learned that the palm trees are the most salt-tolerant trees in this ecosystem, and they are the last to die, obviously.
But they will die.
They will, yes, they will, yeah. There are a lot fewer palm trees in this photograph than there are in that. So, yeah, they become...
Okay. No longer a landscape. I get the clicker. So...
That's to keep me from talking about palm trees.
No, and we can and we will, in fact, have the opportunity to talk about palm trees. But, you know, my job in this project was to place this work in some kind of an art historical context.
Let me just say, in case it's not clear, look, the long essay, Alison has been involved in the project from the beginning.
So I wrote the art history essay, and the scientist wrote the science essay. And so if we are going to talk about your work in a context of all the photographs ever made, which is what I do for a living, I asked Benjamin, who were your influences when you were just beginning to learn? And I do want to point out that these are all white men, and it's not his fault. At the time that Benjamin was entering the world of photography, there was very little attention paid to photographers of color, to women, and that has changed. We're glad. It hasn't changed enough, but it is changing. We see it happening. But this is, I mean, I loved it when you sent me this list because it's such a snapshot of who was around when you were developing your aesthetic, developing the way you work, and your questions. And I thought it would be a little bit interesting to look at a few other pictures here. Can you click for me? I got too many things going on here.
I'm going to multitask next.
Yeah, next please. So of course, when you think of old white men, but also when you think of landscape photographs in the American tradition, Ansel Adams is the one who comes up. And, you know, this is one of his most famous photographs. One of the things that's interesting about Adams that not everyone is aware of is that between the 40s and the 70s, 80s, his style of printing changed very, very much. It's always good to look at when the photograph was printed that you're looking at, because they become stunningly abstract in his later years, that they become much more contrasty, and you can sort of unfocus your eyes at them a little bit, and they're no longer photographs of mountains. They're photographs of black places, gray places, and white places within a rectangle. And I mean, this is a really good example of how, in addition to loving these landscapes and understanding them, he also was able to turn these landscapes into kind of classic modernist compositions. So, I don't know, I mean, is this one of your faves? I mean, I just pulled this out because...
Well, I've been to the Tetons, and I don't know if I got to that spot, but there's so much majesty in this, and awe. I'm assuming
before you ever went there, you had seen this.
It's...
And that's true for most of us.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of critical thing about Adams as a landscape photographer. Let's just sort of dash through these because we want to get back to yours. But again, this is an example of some kind of modernist abstraction pretending to be a landscape. And especially in the context of other photography that was going on at the time. I just think it's an important thing to remember that this is not, it doesn't look like this, right? It has colors, and it doesn't have a rectangle around it. The real place doesn't look like this.
And he's also used filters to make what little blue sky there is darker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's evident in there as well. And it helps create drama in the sky.
That kind of technical brilliance of Adam, he was just such a good printer. But did that influence you? I mean, what made you a landscape photographer? I'm sorry, that's a hard question.
No, I'm trying to come up with where to start or what the short answer is. My mother was a painter. She did abstract paintings. And when you were 5 or 6 years old and you go out to the studio, she's in there painting, and she said usually we're not supposed to interrupt her work. So she gives me a pad of paper and something to draw with, and I'm okay on the floor for a while. And I get a little bored, she's over there working, and I get up and I come over and I asked her, what is it a picture of? And she says, oh, Benjamin, paintings don't have to be of anything. That put me.
And yet I think of landscape photography as being sort of so much of something. It's always of this place, not that place. And
what that did for me was made me believe that if it didn't have to be of anything, then it could be anything.
And you chose landscape, not portraiture,
But also it was about how it was put together.
Okay.
And if I'm looking at her easel and what's on it, and if that is something, but it's not of anything, it don't have to be of anything, then it's not semantics because I'm 6 years old. I don't get this. I'm a little confused. Then I go out in the yard the next day or 6 years later, and I'm squinting at stuff and I'm making pictures in my own mind.
Is it here? Is it this button?
Name it.
Or is it this button? I want to, it's this button. Look at that. So again, I chose this one because it is, to my mind, so very abstract. It really, one of the ways you can look at an Ansel Adams photograph is to slightly unfocus your eyes. Mm-hmm. And suddenly what you see is a relationship between the black bits and the white bits and the gray bits. And
what we do.
It is the way we have learned to understand landscape. I mean, like you, long before I ever went out west, I thought I knew what the West looked like because of pictures like this. But I also, one of the reasons I find Adams so very, very interesting is that he had a very real political consciousness. And in addition to making wonderful photographs with no telegraph wires in them or paved roads in them very consciously, he had to work very hard to show a pristine landscape. He also made photographs like this that I think you have to understand as a comment on what we were doing to the land. And as in the essay, I wanted to talk a little bit about photographs that had actually changed political consciousness, that had actually changed awareness. And of course, Adams spoke to Congress about establishing national parks, and he used his photographs for a very specific political intention. Mm-hmm. And I hope I mean, I don't know whether it's any help showing your photographs in Tallahassee, but I mean, I would hope that your photographic project would change some minds, would make people either vote differently or get an electric car.
Or at least let them know. One of my goals early on was to inform people, viewers, that this was happening. This wasn't something that, as I learned in 1972, it's now. It's not something, this is going on now.
And this raises a question I'm going to reserve till we get back to your pictures, but
Okay.
I'm going to ask it when we get there. So, here are some of the other people that you identified, and I like actually juxtaposing that Adams picture with this Strand picture. And again, this is a kind of realistic abstraction, the sort of combination of the real, of what he really saw, but finding in it a beautiful composition and a very specific way of filling the frame. And I think, you know, and even when he does a landscape, it's as abstract as you could ask for.
Well, with that thought, go back just a second to, this reminded me of a Kandinsky.
Sure, and I think it reminded Strand of a Kandinsky too.
I was curious what they, when Kandinsky, you know, were they working at the same time? And
Not exactly, but he was certainly aware of Kandinsky. And that's another lecture, which I'm not going to do tonight. But certainly, modernism in photography was influenced by modernism in painting and vice versa.
Yeah.
But you know, this is, I mean, I was looking for a Strand landscape, and I remembered this one, and what's so great about it is all those horizontal black lines.
It could be a, darn it, what am I thinking about? Go ahead.
It's okay.
Yeah.
And again, just another example of the kind of, and I don't even know, I mean, was this the kind of Strand that you were looking at, or were you looking at?
I would look with this in it.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. I mean, he's one of our great ones, and I can understand how he would influence you, and then we end up with Ray Metzger.
And this looks like a Kandinsky, or I'm just having Kandinsky on my mind. And I love this.
I was so happy when you named Metzger, because I really do think he's an underappreciated American photographer, and I like what he does with rectangles. And you know, the way this rectangle is full. There's no middle in this picture. There's, you know, the corners are absolutely as important as the middle, and it becomes this sort of wonderful pattern of overlapping textures, which you do too. And then, you know, I had this one, which you could lie to me, you could say it was your picture.
Yeah.
But I think that rectangle, or that square, is always a really important part of what you're doing when you make these pictures. And so it would have been interesting if you had named other people as influences, but I think I would have predicted these. Because your work is essentially modernism with a good taste of abstraction going on. And here we are again, and with a Benjamin Dimmitt photograph. And you know, what we see here is a choice you made about sort of framing in camera. And that's why the individual pictures in this book are just so good. You know, talk about the choice you made about exactly where you pointed the camera. I mean, did it take 2 seconds? Did it take a day?
This is a tripod and cable release. I saw the 2 tree trunks that are in the water, and used a wide lens.
Used a what?
A wide angle lens.
Okay.
And I know that it's not necessary, or I feel it's not necessary to include the top of every tree. And that's exactly, there's no cropping here, this is exactly as I shot it. And it's early, this is 2015, it's early in the project, so there isn't a huge amount of devastation in the background as far as the dead trees, but the two here in the lower left, the trunks are, these trees will fall, they'll die and fall,
Right.
and then they will get washed up on the edge of this savanna.
But what's so great about this, I mean, yes, we want to know devastation when we see it, and I know that's the subject of your book, but the subject of this photograph is about these wonderful, almost limb-like human forms twisting together in the middle of the picture. And, you know, is that instinctive? Did you say, ooh, gotta get those? Or were you thinking, oh good, another fallen palm tree, I photographed those?
Oh, it's a quiet conversation when you put your face down. Like the Hasselblad, you slightly do this. When I put my eye up to the viewfinder, I don't say anything. I just unlock the ball head and move the camera around until I see what I want. If it's not what I want, then maybe I change the lens or move left and right.
So,
But the heart is in the eye at that point. I want to fall in love with the order that I'm creating. I'm putting a rectangle, or in this case a square, around something, and it has to resonate. And I work at it until I see something I like.
we're going to move through these pretty quickly because I want to leave time for conversation with the audience, but I'm fascinated by the process that you're going through. Again,
This is the best part of it,
you...
the shooting.
Uh-huh.
The processing film.
How many photographs are there in the book, and what percentage of all of the photographs you've made in this place? I mean, are there hundreds of outtakes, thousands of outtakes?
Well, it's 8 years of new photography. I tend not to shoot a bunch of frames of the same thing unless I am shooting from the canoe. Thank you.
Okay.
And shooting from the canoe means no tripod, no use for a cable release, and it means high-speed film so that I have some depth of field, because there's no...
And you're moving.
But
with the high-speed film, it doesn't show.
And I don't often get a lot of depth of field. But the nice thing is, I can shoot from I have to shoot from my gut because I can't hold all of it still. I'm not using a tripod and making minor adjustments. I'm just looking at it, and if the current moves me, or I have to drop an anchor, and the wind will move, and if framing changes, I'll have to shoot a second shot. Now I have a couple of frames of this because there's current and I get swung around.
I mean, at the risk of starting a very long conversation...
We have all night.
No, we don't. No, we don't. But at a risk of starting a long conversation, I need to raise the question of beauty. I mean, these are beautiful photographs. And even the ones that show a devastated swamp.
This one.
Maybe I'm not sensitive enough to swamps, but they're all beautiful. The devastated ones are also beautiful. And the story of this place and what has happened to it, it could be told in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And you've chosen a sort of classical, and you make these beautiful images. And I guess my question is, if someone looks at this picture and says, oh my God, it's so beautiful, have you failed in terms of getting them to say, I'm going to buy an electric car?
I can't control how people reply or what their response.
No, but
is.
there are ways you could have photographed this that would make people go, oh, this is awful. And maybe they do, the comparisons do that.
Mhm.
But this is a beautiful picture. It's just a beautiful thing to look at. And you should be happy about that. But I just think it's such an important question, do photographs need to be beautiful? Are they confusing if they're beautiful?
Well, I don't know how else to shoot. The
Okay.
order that I mentioned and the couple of frames ago, a couple of pictures ago, what I see through the viewfinder, when it resonates with me, I stop fussing and I shoot.
Mm-hmm.
It's instinct, and I try not to intervene. And you see it when you get it right in your mind's eye, you shoot it. Is it beautiful? And I don't think in those terms. One thing I know it's not is ugly because I don't know how to take ugly photographs.
Well, there's a difference between an ugly photograph and a photograph of something ugly. You can make a beautiful photograph of something ugly, right? Here we are. This is your Ray-Mesker.
I had not thought about that.
But I mean, just the way you're using the frame. I mean, this has a middle, but the corners are just as important. And the overlay of textures.
And it's so layered down, not down, it's so layered that I don't think about that. I know what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a palm sapling, and when the swamp earth is so saturated with salt water from the rising seas that the saplings, the baby trees, are dying,
Mm-hmm.
then this is done. So I look down, I'm standing in muck, and I shoot it.
I rest my case. This is a beautiful photograph. And we should all be very sad and frightened.
You should be frightened.
But within I mean, again, the landscape tradition, until recently in the United States, has, especially with photo, has been to shoot the photograph as though humans had never been there and the photographer is not present. And there is that sense here as well.
Just slip.
That
That
Go
is
back and
nice.
look at this for a minute. We're going to go to questions, but Benjamin had this thing that he really likes in the book that he wanted me to read, and I'm going to because I really like it too. This is a quote from Emmett Gowan, the great photographer, who really understands landscape. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, in a landscape photograph, both the mind and the heart need to find their proper place. Before the landscape, we look for an invitation to stand without premeditation. I think that's what you were just talking about. The heart seems to withdraw, and the body seems always to diminish. At such a moment, our feelings reach for an understanding. This is the gift of a landscape photograph, that the heart finds place to stand. And I was very happy to see this in the book, because I think it's exactly, I mean, this is a personal project for you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've always felt that kind of the landscape of your childhood is the normative one, and this is something you've known your whole life.
Yeah.
So
This is so close to where I grew up.
I thank you for doing this project. I mean, I've known you for a while. We published some of these photographs in an academic journal that I'm associated with. And it's actually kind of a great story, because I arrived at a gathering of photographers saying, what I really hope I'm going to find is someone who's doing something about water and Florida. And like a chorus of angels, hundreds of people said, talk to Benjamin. And I did. And it's been a real pleasure for me doing this project, my little part of it with you. And I didn't have to go to the swamp, which is also kind of good.
But let me ask you this, would you like to go to this place?
There were no bears, right? There were bears and mosquitoes?
Water moccasins, alligators.
Theoretically, I would like to go to this place. I'm not sure that I'm sort of a city kid.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I want to go to alligators too, right? Oh, come on. So we want you to talk. We want you to ask questions. Magda's got the mic.
I'll be passing the mic around, so I see one hand raised.
Benjamin, have you seen photographs or maybe even paintings of this place before 1977 to compare what you saw then to an earlier period?
There's one couple in the book.
Yeah, I haven't. Which are you referring to?
Then William Henry Jackson.
Well, that's
Okay, no, look,
But it's the same turf.
just to see the difference.
I have seen. Where to start? Very briefly, in 1910, hardly cover that. 1910, a sawmill was built on this edge of the swamp, and they built a train trestle, which is the first slide, that went into the swamp, and they took out all of the virgin cypress forests. Very good wood for lots of purposes, and that changed things an awful lot. And I would love to have seen this with 3 or 4 or 500-year-old cypress trees. I've seen ones that were not harvested. They weren't harvested because they were imperfect, and they're still there, but they're very remote. Imperfect meaning that often they'll have a hollow center, or they'll get hit by lightning and blow off the top. And since the swamp was full of these trees, the original harvesters didn't think twice about passing up something that was imperfect and moving on to perfect trees. So that had a big impact. I would love to have seen it then. The same crew, once they got all of the cypress out, cut all the virgin cedar, which was used for cigar boxes in Tampa, and pencils. When they had exhausted all of this, they pulled up the train trestle, except for one that's in the first photograph, and moved up the road and repeated, built another mill and a town, and did that again, and then did it again, and did it again. So landing back in time would need to be before the 20th century began. I would love to see it. I don't have any, it was not photographed then. People didn't go into this place. Native Americans lived there, but I haven't found any of those photographs.
While I have the mic, I also have like a science question, and I'm looking at your comparison photographs, and the sea level hasn't changed.
No, it's coming up from below. The
So-
salt water is coming up from below.
I'm not arguing the point,
Yeah,
I'm just
no.
saying someone would look at the photograph and say, it's the same level. But the salt water, I know the salt water is encroaching on the fresh water, but you
Right,
would think
it's,
the whole thing would go up.
Well, sea level rise is what is or coastal inundation. It's also tidal, meaning so I could be shooting at low tide and it would look one way and go back again at high tide and it would look another way.
Thank you.
I just have a question for both of you, kind of continuing on the first question about the kind of series of photos. Like, has anyone done a photo series like following Ansel Adams, taking the exact same format like you did, using the same format that he did from the same direction, trying to get the same picture over different decades possibly, just to see how things have changed in all those areas like Alaska and wherever over the years? Are you familiar with that?
I can't tell you a name, but there are certain, I mean, there are a lot of pictures of Half Dome out there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that anyone has made a conscious effort to study change over time, but because so many of these places, often because Adams photographed them, became national parks, they haven't changed as much as the area right outside the national park would have. And even Adams could have taken photographs in the same place that showed things like paved roads, but he chose not to. And so it would be possible to take a photograph today that showed slightly, even with a slightly different angle, would show a very different perspective. But, I mean, certainly, I mean, actually, a photographer to look at, if you're interested in comments on time, is Mark Klett, who uses 19th century photographs of outstanding Western landscapes and comments on them photographically. But certainly, yeah, I mean, I think Adams and others who photographed in the American West have changed the way we understand landscape, and certainly the way photographers approach landscape.
It would be interesting to see, you know, the same.
I'm sorry?
It would be interesting to see if like an artist like Benjamin would go out there and try to emulate, you know, like, you know, the same format and the same, but I think even like you said, they're protected like the national parks, but like Denali, it was completely covered in snow.
Yes.
And I think you know, you could tell the same story about global warming from the snow melt, like the snowpack on Denali. I'm sure it is, you know, the last time I saw it, it would look different from that picture. It could have been a different time of year, but still could be an interesting study to be done.
Rephotography, I was aware of Mark Klett's work, and I said to myself when I got started doing the diptychs, or the rephotography, that I'm not imitating him. This is something that people.
No, it's a very
doing.
different thing, but
Yeah.
certainly it's one of the things that photographs do so well, is they record change over time. And I'm sure that if we did some digging, we could come up with some projects that work for the kind of thing you're
And take it
talking
more
about.
locally to like the South Florida, like Clyde Butcher, if you followed his, you know, more recent photos and his black and whites of like the Everglades and some of the strands, like.
And
you'd
those
be
photographs are
see some change.
romanticized in the same way that
Yeah.
Adams' photographs are romanticized, I think.
And that kind of brings me to the question about romanticizing photos and using filters. And for example, the one that you showed of Ansel Adams from Yosemite and Half Dome, where the you were saying the sky was filtered to be much darker. And I'm seeing in your photos, all the skies and all of them were kind of washed out. And is that done on purpose to focus on the subject at hand, or is that just because of what you saw when you were there?
I use filters. It's part of what we do. So Ansel was using heavy filtration, like a red filter. It's all a matter of degree. I wouldn't go that far because it looks fake. It's something I see like this in the several of his. Especially the one with the statue at the refinery.
Yeah.
That's been knocked down a lot. But it's a tool that's in my bag when I'm out there, and I will look at what's in front of me, and if I have time to pull a bunch out, and is it a light yellow, is it a medium yellow, is it a deep yellow, is it an orange, does it need a red filter? This is what's going through my mind. And there are times when I want to have a very, very light grays, and I don't filter much at all. So it's part of what we have to use available to shoot with. I'm looking behind you at the two prints that the museum acquired of my work, and both of them have a filter. I've used a filter in both of them, but my goal is to make it less evident.
And I urge you to spend a little time looking at those pictures. I mean, I think the printing in the book is very good, but you will never get exactly the quality of a gelatin silver print with ink. And so have a look at those. And you have the privilege of looking at them without glass over them. So I urge you to do that. It's one of the ways to really appreciate this work.
Well, oh, we have one more question?
It will be a short one.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. So currently, we don't have any kind of legislation going on or any kind of conservancy that is aware of this area and what is happening, is what you're saying?
Well, what I did was photograph where my friends have cabins so that I could stay there for days. And that area is on the edge of a national wildlife refuge. The rising seas and the devastation that's caused by it goes on all along the Big Bend coast, that north of Tampa, going up to the area below Tallahassee. And there are people who are not happy about it, but the state has allowed, I mean, they're taking the water out of the aquifer is one thing that could be lessened, but there's no political will to do that because Florida wants to be developed. They're landowners, they're ranchers, farmers. Too much money to be made to pay attention to this and what's happening there. Flip side is that if there's, as long as we continue to burn fossil fuel, this is going to continue to happen.
And there are ongoing efforts to pass climate bills federally that would be more successful if we had a different Congress. And you can change that.
And I asked myself, why are you doing this early on? It was a gut response to start photographing this place, and as first year or two I was there, seeing it change very quickly, this became a farewell. And
Elegy.
I
Elegy.
thought to myself, well, perhaps not only should people know about this, I should put this in the hands of people who make decisions. And this is a full-time job.
Are you getting them into their hands? I'm curious if the book
I
is...
have not been able to. I have gotten in touch with a Florida environmental writer who's quite active. I would call him an activist. And I'm hoping that he will write about the book. And then maybe it ends up in the right hands. But there's no political will. There are too many people making money up there.
Thank you very much, Alison.
Cheerful thought.
Oh, and Benjamin. Thank you so much. Remember.